Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased today to welcome Dr. Sanbonmatsu. He teaches at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Massachusetts. And he's joined us today from the airport as he's about to get on his way to a different location. He's going to talk to us today about the nature of human civilization and how it has been weaponized and amplified by the capitalist system. Should be a very interesting talk. I hope that you enjoy it. Over to you, John.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to have been invited to the Canadian Association of the Club of Rome, and I'm looking forward to the discussion and the questions that folks have. Okay, so I've tweaked the title of my talk slightly. It's actually Human Supremacism, Capitalism, and Ecological Collapse. Just give you a basic outline of what I'm going to be covering today. I'm going to begin with the crisis, the ecological crisis, and look at its origins. And I'm going to suggest that speciesism or human supremacism is kind of an organizing principle of human material life and identity. So I'm going to look at the consequences of this system for the ecology of the planet, but also kind of at an existential level, what it means that we've organized our lives this way. Along the way, I'm going to look at ontology and ethics, and I'm going to conclude with some, positive thoughts on an interspecies democracy. So I want to begin with apocalypse, and that really is what we're talking about here. We're talking about the collapse of the planet's ecology. And I think that nothing is more indicative of the nature and depth of the crisis than the accelerating variety, scale, and frequency of mass mortality events where thousands, millions, or in some cases even billions of animals from within a single species die at once. So, for example, in Australia a few years ago, millions of kangaroos went blind and died of a hemorrhaging disease. Off the coast of South Africa, 95% of the colonies of African penguins were recently lost. Off the coast of Bangladesh, Baja, California, the Philippines, Scotland, San Francisco, and other places, thousands of whales and dolphins have perished in mass strandings, ship collisions, and starvation. By the way, songs by blue whales have declined by as much as 40%. And as one scientist remarked, it's like trying to sing while you're starving. The whales have been spending all their time just trying to find food. In Kazakhstan, also a few years ago, half of the entire species died at once, the Saiga antelopes. In the US Southwest, Rome, and other places, thousands of songbirds simply dropped dead from the skies. I mentioned the South African penguins twice. I apologize. In Alaska, this was until recently, this is between 2014 and 16, this was the greatest single mass species die-off observed in any animal. This was the common murre, which is a kind of seabird. 4 million of them died in Alaska. But then that was followed a few years later by the shocking deaths of 5 billion, an estimated 5 billion Pacific sea stars, starfish in the Pacific Ocean. And then even more recently, 10 billion snow crabs, representing 90% of the species, starved to death in the southeastern Bering Sea. And finally, and this is just a snapshot, really, we're seeing the spread of avian flu, which has leapt from from birds to mammals, including sea mammals. And so we're talking about millions of animals who are dying of that disease right now. And when we think about the ecological crisis, we think of all sorts of different dimensions to it. And this is really the problem, that we're facing a hydra-headed crisis that's simply without precedent in human history or even natural history. You have to go back over 60 million years, 65 million years to the last mass species extinction event of the dinosaurs. So we have any number of pathologies in the ecology of our planet. And one of the problems with this is we lose the forest for the trees. A couple of years ago, David Suzuki, the Canadian biologist, was interviewed by the New York Times, and he said the following: "We failed big time we as environmentalists focused on issues, drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, threats to the caribou herd, stopping a dam in the Amazon. But even when we won, we failed as a movement to change the underlying assumptions of society, the behavior of government and business people. And one of the things that I've found very striking in my lifetime is that during the exact same period that we saw the rise after Rachel Carson's Silent Spring in the 1960s and state regulations and laws that were supposed to protect animals and the environment. During this period from, say, especially the 80s to the 2000s, the large-scale environmental lobby organizations grew. They expanded their membership and their fundraising base, and at the same time, the ecology of the planet was being wiped out. So that's a paradox that I try to explain in my book, The Omnivore's Deception, which came out last year. So I want to talk about two different dimensions in a systematic way or systemic way, really. And I apologize that this is somewhat schematic, but nonetheless, I think it's suggestive of the scale and organic depth of the crisis. So I describe these two systems, capitalism and speciesism, as strands, kind of interconnected strands, akin to DNA encoding this DNA structure, this double helix encoding the end of terrestrial life. So I want to begin by saying a little bit about capitalism, because that, of course, is something that's been written about quite a bit before getting to perhaps an unconventional way of thinking about the crisis. Ecological Marxists have been talking about this for a long time, and they have pushed back against the narrative of the Anthropocene, which is that a geologic epoch or era in which humans are now essentially geoengineering the planet and leading to a new level of stratification in which human civilization alters the metabolism of the planet. But Marxists point out that it's actually a system of production capitalism that is causing this. In their view, environmental problems are the inevitable result of internal logics and structural contradictions of the capitalist system. And that is, in fact, largely true. So if you look at capitalism systemically, we find that nature and living beings are reduced to the status of commodities, then degraded or destroyed in the extraction process. The costs of production, the ecological costs, are socialized, as say they're sloughed off onto vulnerable communities and the state. Monopolization of capital concentrates power in the hands of an industrial and technological elite who are just by definition almost opposed to structural reform, let alone revolution. Oligarchy, meanwhile, distorts the information environment, destabilizing democracy and making social change difficult. And as I've alluded to, this set of dynamics ends up deepening the legitimation crisis of the state, which loses its core function, going all the way back to Hobbes, which is securitization, keeping people safe and viable. The capitalist system, meanwhile, alienates us from nature, from other animals, and from one another. Georg Lukács describes this dynamic as reification, where living processes and organisms are essentially reduced to objects, and at the same time, we find machines more and more personified. AI is the ultimate realization of this, but this process was inherent in the capitalist logic from the beginning. Meanwhile, the subject, the individual, is interpolated by this system as a consumer rather than as a citizen or an ethical subject. In Marcuse's terms, it's a mutilation of the subject. We find epistemic fragmentation, that is to say, people no longer have a basis for a common knowledge of facts because of the commodified media environment. So political consensus becomes almost impossible. As a whole, capitalism creates a second nature, an artifactual nature, and then that nature, which we call culture, is really the reflection of the logic of capital, so that we can't, in a way, think outside that system. And finally, and this is not an exhaustive list, I just want to touch on some aspects of it. Capitalism reinforces patriarchal relations, forestalling other ways of knowing and being, including, as I'll return to, knowing the world and knowing other beings on the planet through empathy and compassion. So capitalism is, it's an understood phenomenon. There are thousands of people writing on this topic. This aspect, speciesism or human supremacism, it has not been written about as much or described as much, certainly not within mainstream sociology or environmental studies. There's a joke that David Foster Wallace told at a college commencement some years ago, famous joke, in which one fish says to a couple of other fish, "What do you think of the water today?" I think originally it was like, "How's the water, boys?" And the other fish responds, "What is water?" And I want to suggest that that term, speciesism, which represents a kind of global structure, it is so ubiquitous and so normalized and naturalized that we do not even notice it, even though it's the most destructive force on the earth. So at a global level, we can see this system as a global totalitarian structure based around the control, captivity, and reproduction, and finally extermination of our fellow beings. So here's just a simple map of, quote, livestock production. And you can see that most of the earth is given over to animal agriculture. In fact, animal agriculture is the largest artifact ever produced by Homo sapiens. I mean, it dwarfs even our roadways and cities and so forth. So if I'm asking in a way for a gestalt switch here, are we facing an environmental crisis? Or is this rather a crisis of a certain way of being human, a crisis of human supremacy and extermination? The number of animals being killed annually every year for just the food system is estimated to be 80 billion land animals, mostly mammals and birds, but of course reptiles, amphibians, and many other animals, not counting the trillions of insects who are killed. And then at sea, we're talking about 30 trillion or more marine animals being killed every single year. I love this slide. Things are not always what they seem. The deer isn't crossing the road is crossing the forest, because what I'm suggesting is that we rethink the nature of the problem that we're facing as a species and as members of a terrestrial biotic community. So what I'm calling speciesism, which is a term that's been kicking around for some decades, is specifically a mode of producing human life, a totalitarian system of mass violence, and a structure that has economic, political, cultural, and existential implications. So when I say an existential structure, I mean, as I say here, a way of organizing human being in the world. Now, this system is articulated with the capitalist world system. Speciesism, broadly speaking, in various forms and iterations going back thousands of years, certainly as far back as the Neolithic period, 11,000 years ago, and even before that, arguably, is the material and ideological basis for capital accumulation. So, but it precedes capitalism. I'm not reducing the ecological crisis to capitalism alone. Right? This system, as Marxists have demonstrated for 200 years, is rife with structural systemic contradictions. In Gramscian terms, this leads to periodic organic crises, which then have to be resolved one way or the other. And as what we're seeing today with the breakdown of the liberal capitalist system, let's say the waning of the liberal democratic state, deepening ecological annihilation, fascism, and so forth. All of these contradictions are coming to a head, and partly because the pressures of capitalism have generated a legitimation crisis at the level of the state, requiring therefore new modes of legitimation through social practice, ideology, and culture. This is not an exhaustive list of the way the animal system is destabilizing terrestrial life. Depending on how you read things like the Living Planet report of the London Zoological Society and the World Wildlife Fund, in fact, the animal food economy is the most destructive force on the planet, actually worse than global warming, and yet no one talks about it. But this system is the leading source of mass species extinction, one of the leading sources of global warming. It's leading to the degradation and loss of arable land, freshwater sources, destruction of ocean life, and so forth. I just want to know one of the contradictions of the system, which is the growing threat of pandemics like avian flu, which at any moment we could be in the middle of a pandemic that could be 100 times worse than COVID-19. And this is complex reasons having to do with the way animal agriculture is destroying animal habitats, forcing different species into closer proximity to one another, creating new vectors of disease, but also by crowding animals into what are essentially concentration camps and stressing their systems so much. We're reproducing this virus and it's mutating and churning on our farms around the world. Now, in 2006, the FAO, the United Nations, put out a very influential report that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It was called Livestock's Long Shadow. And I'm trying to okay, here we go. The report indicted animal farming as one of the most significant causes of ecological collapse. Here's a quote from the report, again, 2006. The livestock sector is one of the 2 or 3 most significant contributors to the most serious environmental problems at every scale from local to global, including land degradation, climate change and air pollution, water shortage and water pollution, and loss of diversity. Time magazine in the years since then, an article described livestock production as perhaps having a bigger impact on the planet than anything else. For example, this is one example from the report, 37% of all methane emissions come from animal agriculture and 65% of all nitrous oxide emissions. So I'm not counting just carbon dioxide. In 2021, there was a study published in Nature that estimated that animal agriculture was responsible for up to 30% of global greenhouse gases, which makes it greater than the entire transportation sector. So here are just some quick facts about food production. So if you look at the highest producing carbon emitting food source, beef. From a beef herd, you see 99.48 kilograms by, emissions measured in carbon dioxide equivalents. If you go to the bottom, bananas, potatoes, nuts, negligible. This was published in the BBC a couple of years ago, the LEAP survey. High meat, you see, can produce up to over 10 kilograms of carbon dioxide. Even low carbon meat, 5.37, whereas the vegan diets yield 2.47 kilograms. Now, in the years since the UN FAO report was published, scientists have been essentially harassed because of the animal food lobby. This was an article that appeared in The Guardian a few years ago. Scientists who had worked on the original report were censored, sabotaged, undermined, and victimized for more than a decade as punishment for writing about the hugely damaging contribution of methane emissions from livestock to global heating. Inefficiencies of the animal system include land use, water use, fossil fuel use, inefficiencies in transferring animal flesh into metabolizable calories for humans, pollution and toxic waste. Another chart showing how much land is being used to graze animals compared to plant-based diets, biodiversity and deforestation losses. Now, this was a World Rainforest report from 2004. In fact, it's gotten worse since then. But back then, 40% of all the rainforest had been cleared or burned down for cattle pasture. Meanwhile, animal agriculture is using up all the groundwater in the US alone. Animal agriculture uses 34 to 76 trillion gallons of fresh water. So as I'm sure you know that our aquifers are all disappearing. And in fact, some American cities are literally sinking into the ground because of that depletion. I mentioned in one of my slides, plastics in the ocean, which people think that plastics in the seas are mostly from our shopping at the store kind of thing, but actually that's not true. Up to 86% of plastics in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch consists of discarded fishing gear, lines and nets. Now, I want to take a step back because I frame this as, in terms of two dynamics, the capitalist system of accumulation, and what I've described as speciesism or human domination of other beings. And I find that when we talk about these issues, people really have a misunderstanding of who and what the other beings of this planet are. And so I want to review some of the basic facts about that. In human culture, we have a foundational dualism, not merely a binary, but a dualism in which one concept is by definition being constituted through its negation, through the opposite. So to be human is precisely to be not animal. Now, this idea goes back thousands of years. It's nothing new, but it is the fundamental structuring principle of all human sociality. There are millions of these kinds of examples. I mean, literally millions of examples from popular culture. This is from the movie Moana, depicting a chicken as just really stupid. And that's simply not the case. The animals are not stupid. Darwin, in Descent of Man in 1871, argued that the difference in mind between humans and higher animals is one of degree and not of kind, and other animals too exhibit certain high mental powers, such as formation of general concepts, self-consciousness, and so forth. The senses and intuitions, various emotions and faculties such as love, memory, attention, curiosity, imitation, reason, and so forth, of which man boasts, may be found in other animals as well. And we've found in the centuries, almost 2 centuries since then, science has confirmed this. We find that very complex cognition, sophisticated emotions, and so forth are to be found throughout the phylogenetic animal, phylogenetic kingdom, all across animal life. In the Western tradition, personhood has been defined exclusively, pretty much, in terms of 3 characteristics, leaving aside monotheism: reason, language, and freedom. Say that only humans are thought to have reason and language, which therefore makes possible freedom, both as an ontological fact and as a capacity or potentiality. But there are many other qualities of personhood that we recognize on a daily level in terms of our interaction or intersubjective relations with other beings, including simply having consciousness, as I say, having subjective experience of the world. In phenomenological terms, intentionality of consciousness, as Husserl termed it, creative expression, sense of self, temporality, intelligence, having preferences, exhibiting and experiencing complex emotions, including joy, friendship, love, so forth, seeking pleasure, delight in playing, having concern for others, even enacting moral behavior. And this is something that we think is unique to humans, but it's not. The late primatologist Franz de Waal, among other cognitive ethologists, they've demonstrated that other animals have a sense of fairness and reciprocity, that they are capable of empathizing with others. And of course, animals like us are beings of flesh, and therefore they suffer. They suffer psychologically in the exact same terms we do. They're vulnerable to pain, but also to more complex forms of suffering like PTSD and trauma. They even have fear of death. So if we shift, we do a Gestalt switch and a shift of framework, we see that we are not alone on this planet. And I mean that in a very non-trivial sense, in the sense that we share the planet with other consciousnesses and someones, whether we call them persons or someones or subjects, beings in the world. It amounts to the same thing, which is a subjective consciousness for whom the qualities of life and experience matter. I mentioned the kind of stereotypes of chickens as stupid, and in fact, here's an article from Scientific American. There's been plenty of research showing that chickens, like other birds, there's nothing distinctive about chickens in this way, are in fact highly intelligent. Remember, the birds are descendants directly of the dinosaurs, so their evolutionary history precedes ours by many millions of years. I want to show you this brief clip from a donkey sanctuary in the Netherlands, because I want to talk for a minute about emotions in other species. So hopefully this will play. If for some reason you're not hearing it, please someone speak out and let me know.
allemaal jouw vrienden. Hey.
Now, when I show that video to my students, sometimes what I hear is they're amazed that donkeys have such human-like emotion. But of course, that's a kind of anthropocentric view, right? Because donkeys and their ancestors were here on the planet before we were. And they share with us and other mammals, and not just mammals, birds and so forth, the capacity for sensing the states and experiences of others, and what we call empathy as a mode of attunement. So humans are actually pretty late to this wonderful panoply of feeling and being that other beings have been participating in for many millions of years. When we think about what a cow is, typically people think, well, a cow is simply a kind of object, animate object that moves and gives milk. Of course, cows don't give milk any more than any other mammal produces milk. They have to be impregnated, and then their young are taken away from them, causing trauma to both of them at a young age, so that they can be kept lactating. Which, you know, in this perpetual cycle, the calcium is leached from their bones. They develop osteoporosis and other diseases, mastitis. But here's a video showing that the cows are somewhat more than simply milking machines. Here's another example of non-human animal play. Now, you know, the sheep doesn't understand the rules exactly, but the sheep is very interested in participating with these other beings in this playful, creative activity. I want to show you a clip from a film about a Japanese diver who befriended a fish and has been friends with this fish for decades, this particular animal, because we think of fish as, you know, cognitively primitive or something and not having emotions, and that's completely not true. If you begin to think about fish as like cats and dogs, you can begin to understand that each is a unique individual with subjectivity.
ただいれば通じ合うっていうのかな、話し相手じゃないけど自然とそうなっちゃった。試したらキスしてるんだよね。でもやってくれるのは私しかやってくれないよ。鳥のところに頼子がいて、頼子ったのがやっぱ30年ぐらい前かな。と日本でいうコブダイ、まあコブがあるからでしょうね。よく真正面から見ると人の顔に似てるんです。よく見るとね、誰かに似てるなと思う。これはね、1ヶ月ぐらい経った。それである種だから鳥居のとこでもうくたくたの状態でいたわけですよ。これもうみんな触るから白くなっちゃって。でそれを見て餌取れないから毎日5個ぐらいずつ食べさせて10日ぐらいしたらでも良くなってきましたよ。えぐく程度のことはどこでも誰でもできると。ただ触れたりいろんなことを一緒にやれるっていうのはなかなか。
There are, in fact, many examples of divers who have befriended wild fish. And if any of you have seen the Netflix documentary, My Octopus Teacher, you know that even with mollusks, octopuses who are quite intelligent and sociable, humans have formed friendships with them as well. The paradox of our relations with other animals, of course, is that we do not treat other animals as someone or as persons. Instead, we treat them as subordinates and inferiors who are not worthy of the lives or their own existences. So when I think about this, I often draw on Max Weber's concept of Herrschaft, which simply is domination, but a political and social relation in which members of a powerful group dominate or exploit members of a weaker group. I normally would take questions from the audience about this part of it, but when I ask students how many humans are killed by sharks each year, and then I ask them how many sharks are killed by humans each year, the answers are quite striking, because my students almost always get it right that humans are killed by sharks every year in the numbers of 10 to 15 or so globally. But in every case, and I've been doing this exercise for 20 years, students, when asked to estimate the number of sharks being killed by humans, they're off by several orders of magnitude. In fact, it's been estimated to be 100 million or more. In the case of hammerheads, for example, they are hauled up onto decks of ships. Their fins can be cut off in the millions for shark fin soup, which is an Asian delicacy, and then the animals are tossed overboard to drown. So this is causing a number of shark species to be nearing extinction. I want to show you a brief clip from a film called Meet Your Meat, which is the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg, as it were, of the violence that we inflict on animals in the food economy. I've really edited this down. It's just about a minute and a half, I think, or so. But I think it's really important when talking about these ideas, which can seem very abstract, to ground our discussion in, kind of bearing witness to the suffering that we're inflicting on other sensitive beings.
Chickens are probably the most abused animals on the face of the planet. They are crammed into filthy sheds by the tens of thousands, immersed in their own excrement among the corpses of other birds who died of heart attacks or stress. These hens are so crowded that they are unable to spread even one wing during their entire miserable lives. After being genetically manipulated, their hearts, lungs, and legs often break down under the added weight. Heart attacks and crippling leg deformities are far too common. A PETA investigation found this farmer killing sick and injured turkeys by beating them with a metal rod and then tossing them aside, leaving them still conscious and suffering. This was deemed legal and standard by the industry. The animals are loaded onto trucks and taken through extreme weather conditions without food or water to slaughterhouses. Where they are snapped into shackles by their fragile legs and have their throats slit, often while still conscious. Confined to tiny stalls that don't even allow mother pigs to turn around for most of their pregnancy, the first time that these animals will breathe fresh air is when they are on the back of a truck headed for the slaughterhouse. Shortly after birth, baby pigs have their ears mutilated, the ends of their teeth chopped off, their tails cut off, and they are also castrated, all without any painkillers. Pigs who aren't growing quickly enough, called fall-behinds, are killed by being slammed headfirst against the concrete floor, as you see here. Like chickens, pigs grow so quickly that they can't walk normally. Their limbs simply can't sustain their drug-induced bulk. Many pigs become ill or injured, but are not put out of their misery because as long as they're still alive, they have a chance of generating profits for the company if they can make it to slaughter. Those who obviously can't make it to the slaughterhouse are shot with a captive bolt gun so that they don't waste the company's money by eating feed. Removing pigs by beating them with gate rods is one of the more common forms of abuse.
I'm sorry to have to show that, but again, I
Chickens are probably
think it's important to understand something of the nature of the system. So the animals are enmeshed in this global structure, really, of capital accumulation, division of labor, where low-skilled, low-paid workers are, they come into these industries, often immigrant laborers, to participate in extremely hazardous and morally degrading work in order to get animal products onto our tables. Now, with kind of growing awareness of industrialized agriculture and with, a little bit of nascent public concern about these practices, there've been a whole series of mechanisms culturally to justify and shore up the system. So this is simply kind of standard for any kind of structure of oppression and inequality, that you need to continually reinforce it, the hegemonic system, right? So this is an example of the legitimation crisis of the animal system. This was a contest in the New York Times back in 2012, inviting readers to tell the newspaper why it's ethical to eat meat. The long history to this, but it's actually not that long. It's only about 20 years now. But I go into this in my new book, The Omnivore's Deception, which is based partly on, as a response to Michael Pollan's huge bestseller, The Omnivore's Dilemma, which came out in 2006. The idea has been percolating for some time, and I could talk about this in the Q&A if you like. The idea that we can have our meat in our conscience too. We can continue to treat animals in these ways by modifying, aspects of their domination. So there are just thousands of these books and articles and films, all defending essentially the principle of human supremacism. This is a sign at Whole Foods supermarket, a hearty helping of animal compassion with every order. Whole Foods, of course, is one of the leading traffickers in the bodies of animals who've been exploited and killed. Nonetheless, animals are always seen to consent to our treatment of them. There are many examples I could give you, but Lear Keith and Michael Pollan, here are some examples. Animal agriculture, Keith says, is a partnership, a relationship of mutuality and respect. Michael Pollan describes animal agriculture as mutualism and symbiosis. Well, in the course of my research, what I found is these really extraordinary parallels between apologia for human slavery in the ancient world and the antebellum American South, and parallels between these forms of apologia and contemporary defenses of animal agriculture. So Kathy Rudy, for example, has said animals have been good friends to us throughout the millennia. So partnership and mutual respect is, it's hard to swallow that in the context of what is, really a totalitarian system of violence. Aristotle, 2,500 years ago, described the slave as a living tool, and he also said that other animals are there for human use. So this idea of a natural hierarchy of beings continues to structure our experiences today. So when the New York Times publishes photographs like this one of yoked oxen, it's simply presented as, in this pastoral way, as a pleasant sight. And yet the ideological mechanisms of legitimacy are the same as we found in the ancient world for slavery, which, by the way, I can talk about this, but human slavery was based on animal domestication. Barbara Kingsolver, the very well-known writer, that has described animals as, quote, four-legged tools. They're human property, not just legally, but biologically, which of course is a ridiculous notion. When we think about the way that enslaved humans were subjected to controls, we understand now in a way that people back then didn't, right? Slavery persisted for thousands of years and was seen as a natural phenomenon. It was seen as morally appropriate. It wasn't until the modern period when with enlightenment, that it becomes possible to step outside the common sense, the givenness of the world, to see that this is unacceptable. Well, we're still in this period of human history where we view other animals of the planet as de facto slaves or slaveable beings and as commodities. So we still use whips and chains and electric prods, just as human slave owners used to do that to the enslaved. These are images of domination. I used the Weberian term Herrschaft, right? This is a political project of dominating, of one group dominating and controlling members of another group. And these members of other groups are capable of freedom. And despite our kind of prejudice that other beings are not capable of freedom, in fact, they are capable. I know I'm getting close to the end of my time. I just want to make a few more comments about legitimation. Thomas Dew was one of the leading apologists for chattel or racial slavery in the antebellum South. And he said in 1832, liberty has been the heaviest curse to the slave when given too soon. Fast forward almost 200 years, you have Michael Pollan in The Omnivore's Dilemma saying liberation is the last thing a farmed animal, a farmed creature wants. Again, find all of these similarities. Slaves were always seen as happy on the plantations, as being fulfilled, a racial trope that then continued on into mass media culture, where it continues to this day, in fact. And similarly, we find that animals are happy to be killed for us. Here we have a picture of a cow turning around happily to see herself being carved up into little pieces. Kate Millett in Sexual Politics in 1970 introduced Weber's term of Herrschaft to describe the politics between men and women. This is to say that she cast relations under patriarchy as a set of relations based on dominance and domination. Carol Adams, 20 years later, entitled her path-breaking book, The Sexual Politics of Meat, in kind of honor of Millett's thesis. And what Adams pointed out in painstaking detail is that we have constructed our economies and gender identities around domination of animals. So to this day, we associate hunting, barbecuing, and so forth with manliness, masculinity. And this idea, by the way, of men as kind of the overseers of non-human animals is articulated with the feminization of animals. And what Carol Adams pointed out in her book is that both under patriarchy and speciesism, we find the fragmentation and objectification of the bodies of animals and women. This is a very famous and controversial cover on Hustler magazine's cover, I should say, in 1978, when Larry Flint, the publisher, was responding to feminist charges that Hustler treated women as pieces of meat. So he came up with this idea. This is an Israeli ad for a meat product. You can see the woman carved up into sections, just like an animal would be. The normalization of violence against animals is state sanctioned. So the state is not a neutral party in this. Here's an ad by the state of Texas promoting the sadistic killing of animals as recreation. So just to wrap up, I want to suggest that the ecological crisis, if we are going to be able to do anything to staunch this hemorrhage of the planet's living systems and living organisms, we need a foundational shift to a new way of being with other animals. In the phenomenological terminology, meat sign, being with others, a new intersubjective democracy. This idea harkens back to the earliest stories that we've told one another over the centuries and millennia. The idea of the peaceable kingdom, the idea of the Garden of Eden, right, where there's no predation and where humans live in harmony with other beings. I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts here, a couple of visions of what that might look like. This is a story about a diver who has been going around rescuing or helping sharks who have been suffering with hooks in their mouths. As you'll see here, this is a pretty short video. Whoops. I apologize. I'm not able to show you that video for some reason. That is a shame. Well, this is it's a similar idea here, which is the idea of intersubjective empathy. I'm going to show you this 1-minute video instead.
Yeah, the dead fish.
So that appeal to your emotions, really, I make no apologies for it. I think that one of the problems with the way we talk about the world crisis that we're in, which is really, as I've said, a breakdown of the institutions and frameworks that have guided capitalist development and the international political order for decades and centuries, in fact, is that we leave out the affective dimension. Let's say that the role that our emotions should play in the constitution of new political orders, new social practices, and so forth. So I think it's really important to come back to that, because what we're seeing on the far right is just a kind of naked, desublimated aggression and sadism. And what I argue in my work is that we have these resources that we share with other animals, let's say a capacity for generousness, or generosity, I should say, and compassion, which can become the basis of a new civilizational order, which is really what I'm arguing for. This picture by Delacroix of liberty leading the people, with the figure of Marianne representing the French nation, very famous. This last image I want to leave you with is by the German artist Hartmut Kiebert, which imagines a future human society where enlightenment is expanded. Our vision of who counts as a citizen, who counts as belonging to a community, is expanded to include other species, and where we liberate them from the structure of human capitalist aggression and domination. All right, I'm sorry I went a couple minutes long. Thank you, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Great, thank you very much, John. I wanted to offer a couple of observations and ask a question, and Art Hunter is on deck. So my first one is, I really liked your explanation of what we might call our current era, but you should also know that my name for the current era is the Pyrocene. And in many ways, the burning up of animals and plants around us fits right into that. My second observation is this: Alberta has just decided essentially they want to circumvent our Canadian national program to preserve nature, which is 30 by 30, 30% of the country protected by 2030, by declaring that all Crown lands are in fact protected areas. These are the lands that are subject to forestry, oil and gas exploration and development, and mining. If you can imagine, this is just rhetoric, essentially. But here's my question. People are healthier when they live in close proximity to the natural world. What do you suspect may happen to us if we continue to lose the plants and animals with which we evolved?
I mean, there's no question that we can't live on a world without pollinators. We can't live on there's talk of like creating robot pollinators, for example, because pesticides and habitat destruction are endangering, the species who make it possible agriculture. This is one example of the way that the ecological collapse will eventually come around to us. I mean, I think there's a consensus among scientists that when we talk about so-called sustainability, what we mean is that the carrying capacity of the Earth to carry us is being degraded, hour by hour by hour. And I want to emphasize there is nothing whatsoever to stop this decline. There is no force. The government is not going to stop it, because the government is the tail on the dog of capitalism, right? 5 centuries of attempts to regulate the excesses of capitalism by the state have failed. So there's nothing to stand in the way of the total rampaging of capital and human supremacism at all. There's the West German Greens kind of famously said that capitalism will recognize limits only after the last tree is chopped down. Right? There are no internal mechanisms I mean, John Bellamy Foster, the ecological Marxist, in his critique of James O'Connor's second contradiction of capital, was right about this. You know, O'Connor had a kind of optimistic view that maybe there'd be a feedback mechanism where the destruction of the earth would give rise, and as it has actually, to new social movements that would push back against capitalist expansion and slow ecological decline. That has not happened. All the biotic indicators get worse and worse every year. And in fact, what I've noticed in the last 20 years is that scientists who work in climate change, global warming, anthropogenic global warming, their models are wrong. Because you just read the headlines. Scientists are shocked that, you know, the Antarctic ice sheet is melting faster, or Greenland, you know. And so we're accelerating. So when we cannot survive on such a planet, it's already becoming unlivable, our world, right?
Great. Okay, thank you. So on deck, I've got Raymond Lurie, and right now we're going to go to Art Hunter. Nice. Okay.
Yeah. Well, you've led right into my question, in that I'm certainly aware, and many others are as well, that we are in the sixth extinction event, and over geological time, and you know, a couple of million years between events, a lot of things can happen, and you know, different species will evolve. Possibly not. Humanoids don't come with each event, because a lot can happen in, as I say, in a few million years. Now, from what you've said, I'm you know, certainly supportive of your thesis that says we are very much part of accelerating that natural cycle that has been around. And I guess the real question is, have you looked at this and possibly tried to come up with some analysis which says how big an impact that we're having on what I consider a natural cycle anyway?
Well, it's not a natural cycle. I mean, it's the sixth. This is the only mass extinction caused by a conscious species, right? And whose very way of life, its mode of being in the world, is omnicidal. What's characteristic about Homo sapiens is not that we use tools, man the thinker, is that we kill every other being on the earth, and we've organized our identity around that. And so it's not. I mean, it's true. We're natural beings, so I don't, you know. So in that sense, it's natural. But I think we should resist a kind of glossing over of, you know, just in a normative sense, glossing over the cruelty and suffering that is being inflicted. I mean, because in the long view, you could say, you know, and you're right. In the long view, whether in the past or in the future, if we look to the past, we find that 99.9% or something of all organisms that ever existed have already gone extinct. So that is part of the natural history of our planet.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look in the long-term future, everyone is going to be dead. But that's true of you and me as human beings too. We're finite, but that doesn't justify someone coming in and killing us. Just to say, well, we're all going to be dead eventually, right? So I think it's really important just to not kind of dismiss, not that you were doing this, but I do find that we all kind of have this tendency, well, we'll just take the long view here and just think, well, it's just part of the natural world, blah, blah, blah. If you see a child starve to death, you know, and you say, oh, it's just nature taking its course, or a child dying of cancer, well, that's just the way that happens. I think that that's a monstrous position to take. And I think that we can do better than that as moral beings, you know. That's how I'd answer that.
Yeah, and John, I just wanted to add a comment before I move on. Your presentation was extremely moving, and I congratulate you on putting that together.
Thank you, Art. Appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. I've got Andrew Welsh on deck to clarify a comment that he made. And Raymond Lurie, we're going to go to you now.
Thanks, Dave. A very, very interesting presentation. I agree with Art. So Dave sort of touched on this a bit. There's some talk about setting aside 30% of the oceans and the Earth's surface for nature, right? So the question is, what do you think about this? And is this enough, or do we need to be more ambitious and set aside a larger proportion of the planet?
Thank you. Well, it reminds me of my country, the United States, which last I checked had something like 5% of the world's population and was consuming 30% of the world's resources. I think that 100% of the planet should be shared, not just like 30% of it. And I'm skeptical that, under this apparatus that states will agree to that and enforce that, but it would be a good start. Troy Batese, the environmental historian, and Drew Pendergast wrote a book called Half Earth Socialism, where they use E.O. Wilson's concept of setting aside half the Earth, for other beings. And what Batese has painstakingly shown, actually, is that if we were to do away with animal agriculture alone, we would reforest that would allow us to reforest the Earth, which would be a natural way to geoengineer a solution to global warming, because it would sequester something like 215 gigatons of carbon in the decades ahead. But what I think is that if we organized production, and our economies around a different set of principles and relations, material relations, where humans were not themselves coerced, right, through class dominion, then we could begin to see the Earth as a shared thing, and not just giving over 30%. I don't think that's enough, personally. If we're going to continue this way, if we're going to continue to kill trillions of animals every single year, I don't see how the setting aside the 30% thing is going to really help that much. And by the same token, if we're going to allow capital to view nature as either as a commodity or a commodity in waiting, as raw material that can be monetized, then I just don't think that's to the point either.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. I've got Gene Doherty on deck, and we're going to go to Andrew Welsh now.
Hi, thanks so much, John. I want to give some context to my comment and my question, because what I study as a self-titled ecological philosopher is value systems. And you were talking about natural versus unnatural with art, and we are natural beings. So my overall thesis is that the thing that's unnatural is the value system that we apply. That being the idea of measuring things by number, where more is always better, and I claim that doesn't exist in nature. So within that context, you made a comment about personhood, and that struck me that there's this concept of legal personhood. And my comment was that we appear to assign more powers and more rights to corporations because of this legal personhood than we assign to our fellow animals, based on the fact that corporations match our numerical value system and animals only match our qualitative value systems. So I wanted to get your thoughts on whether, what I'd love for you to do is take your work showing the relationship between humans and animals and direct that in the other direction to say, are corporations doing the same things to us that we do to animals? And what is the future of corporations gaining even more power through things like AI? Are we going to be seeing, like, part of my thesis is that corporations could be considered a separate species. So will we see the speciesism move even closer to the capitalism and start to feel it ourselves the way we do to other animals, in the same way that the military industrial complex seems to treat entire populations the way we do livestock?
Thank you, Andrew. Great question. I guess I would say that all of these structures and institutions you're describing are themselves artifacts of monopoly capitalism. Marx pointed this out 200 years ago, which is that one of the central contradictions of capital accumulation, right, is that ostensibly, if you take political economists at their word, laissez-faire capitalism leads to competition, right? You have all these different capitals competing. But the contradiction is, it's precisely because of competition that gives rise to its opposite, the negation of competition in monopoly. And I could show you slides where you take any industry, whether it's aerospace, entertainment, the military industrial complex, the meat industry, and you find over the last, 40 years, just, a winnowing out where you start with 30 companies and then in 10 years later, there's 16, and then 10 years later, and then so you just have this small number. So now we have the aggregation of economic power in fewer and fewer hands, as you know, the concentration of wealth, which like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, we can't even comprehend that amount of wealth or the social and political power that it bestows on those individuals and those corporations. So there's no question. I'm glad you brought up AI, because AI is going to accelerate what is already a historically unprecedented vacuuming up of wealth, right, from the middle class and working class up to the not only the top 1%, but the top 0.002% by wealth. So absolutely, and so that's this. We with other species are part of this surveillance system. I mean, I'm quite as an American, I'm quite frightened about what's happening, because you're seeing the creation of a seamless surveillance state through consumer technologies and AI, where surveillance is already being automated. And where Palantir, for example, which is this company that has been participating in the genocide in Gaza, the tools, the surveillance tools and targeting tools, target acquisition tools, Palantir are now being used domestically in the United States, et cetera, et cetera. So I completely agree. I don't agree that corporations are other species. They're merely vessels for the accumulation of capital. And that is simply part of the dynamics of capitalism, that you're going to always have bigger and bigger companies gobbling up other ones. And then you're going to have this entrenched elite that is resistant to any form of change. And then, as you say, we're all doomed. I mean, ultimately, this is as it. Well, I mean, seriously, like, because your power and my power as individuals and citizens is getting more and more diminished as these other powers become aggrandized, and then the state is caught between. That's Habermas, right? The legitimation crisis.
Thank you.
Thank
so much.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.
Wow, I just had a flashback to the movie Rollerball. So I've got Mike Nickerson on deck, and I'm going to swing the screen over to Jean Doherty.
Wow, what a fabulous presentation, John. And I must say that Andrew's question and your discussion was an unbelievable segue into what I wanted to ask. One of the things that I've been thinking in the last while is every time I turn around, there's more and more rights being taken away from people and being put in the hands of actually the economic elites, not even the political elites anymore. It's the economic elites that are taking it on. And I really worry about the fact that the human beings who are the worker bees are now, in fact, captured slaves working on for the rights of the in economic elites and so on. And I just want to get your comment on that. And if there's an opportunity to talk about a couple of other things afterwards, I would do that as well.
Thank you so much. Well, I mean, the term wage slave was developed in at least the 19th century, if not before then, right, to describe this new set of relations where landless people, who due to the enclosure movements in Europe and so forth, were driven off the land and became what Marx called the proletariat, but the working class, right, who don't have anything to sell but their labor. So this is a process of disenfranchisement, right, that's been going on for many centuries, but you're right that the corporate powers are so immense now that they're dwarfing the state. Varoufakis in Greece has termed this techno-feudalism. He thinks that we're leaving capitalism behind and developing very much along the lines of serfdom or slavery. And I think that it remains to be seen what it's going to morph into, or what words we describe it. But it's really bad news. It's really bad news because people are more and more, they lack the ability to make sense of what's happening I mentioned this in my presentation, epistemic fragmentation, that we're all siloed. And so what people call political polarization is really the wrong way to look at this. It's really about how communities have been destroyed, and where we think we know the YouTube influencer better than we know our neighbor, and people are offloading, outsourcing their trust to not only YouTube influencers, but now AI. Millions of people are developing what they think of as close relationships, girlfriends, boyfriends with AI, which of course are controlled by the same technological elite, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and all the rest of this rum crew, Alex Carr, Peter Thiel. So I share your alarm, and I think the only thing that could possibly stand in the way of the total shutdown of the planet's ecology and of our democracy, as you know, is a mass citizen movement, a social movement, or a series of social movements. But my first book was really about the crisis of the left and the lack of any strategy, organization, organizational structure, leadership, or consistent ideology, like a philosophy of praxis that could help us cohere. Instead, it's like I think of it as like a heart, right? If the muscles of the heart are beating out of sync, we have fibrillation, right? And so the patient dies. Well, if you've got a million different movements doing all of these things, it doesn't add up to structural change. That's, I think, our moment.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I went on too long about that, Jean.
No, that's absolutely fascinating, because what various things were flitting through my brain as I was listening to your response as well as to your talk was that as a female in this society, and a well-educated one at that, the structures that we face and the rights that we are losing are actually frightening beyond compare. Because one of the things you hear frequently by people is, if we let women take control of certain things, it will be better than if we allow the men who are macho types going out hunting and killing everything in their path because they want more power. And it's all about power and who has control of that power. And I just find it absolutely horrifying that these are the things that are happening in all the countries around the world. But the domination of women and children and others that are not the typical alpha male types it's going to be a real problem. So
yeah,
sorry, I just wanted to say thank you again for that, and an absolutely fabulous talk.
Thank you so much. I totally agree. And in fact, because I have a limited time, I couldn't get into what's happening in terms of patriarchy and misogyny. But, there was this backlash against veganism and against environmentalism, and it's tied in with the resurgent fascist right-wing authoritarian populism, right, that we see all around the world. And so the question of eating meat, for example, it's totally politicized. It's part of the culture wars. You're finding pushback in Europe, say, against environmentalists who want to either reform or roll back animal farming for climate change reasons. You have Governor DeSantis in Florida issuing an executive proclamation that the global elite are trying to take away people's steaks and make them eat bugs. And there's all this craziness, but it is part of a whole cloth, right? The gender wars are tied in with a whole ideology of natural supremacy, national domination. And my government, the Trump administration with Pete Hegseth and others, they're putting it out there for all to see. We're past this period of soft power, and we're back to 19th century gunboat diplomacy and the naked exercise of force and violence. And that's why, if you talk about caring for other animals, caring about the environment, you're seen as what they call soy boy. That's a derogatory term linking veganism or sympathy for the environment with effeminacy. So I could go on and on about it, but I'm really glad you say that, because last thing is, you may know this, but there's actually a movement in the United States to overturn suffrage, so that in future, there's actually an organized movement that women should not have the right to vote, that the male, as the head of the household, should vote for the family. This is actually happening over here.
Oh my God.
So stay over there in Canada. That's my
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much. I was interested that what popped into mind when you said soy was the opposite is, well, fat boy, what do you have to say about that? Okay, we're going to be going to Andrew Welsh for a thank you in a minute, but first we got a question from Mike Nickerson.
Okay, well, thank you for your presentation. It lays the groundwork. Near the beginning, you mentioned political order, changing the political order and social practices. And this is where my focus has been. We're trying to think of how do you shift from this material accumulation, exploitation, consumption paradigm to something that's focused more on what we do with our lives, our relating, our learning, our appreciation of the world. And to that end, we use the slogan, more fun, less stuff. And trying to boil down, 40 years of studying cultural evolution into 4 words that is quite catchy. So I'm just offering that to you as a way that it introduces the change and the shift in focus that we have to go through. And then there's all manner of additional stuff that we offer, and you'll find it all over the place if you look for it. Well, your own presentation is talking about it. So more fun, less stuff. That's a guidepost for a future.
I like that very much, especially if we define fun, broaden that concept to include community and other goods, right? Other goods that we want to value, connection with other beings on the planet and so on. And I'm sympathetic to the degrowth movement, which you may know about, which seeks to create a new theory of economic development that's not based on endless growth, because on a finite world, infinite growth leads to the cannibalization of the means of life, right? That's what we're seeing. The only thing I would add, though, is that when we talk, because I like that slogan, we're talking about entrenched power interests and institutions of violence that have to be overthrown. I mean, I hate to sound like a revolutionary, but what we need is actually revolutionary change. But we're pushing up against people with guns, and we're pushing up against people with nukes, and we're pushing up against people who control the discourse. So it's very bracing to think about what the task is. But what I try to do in my work, and what I try to do in my presentations, is to say this is the work that needs to be done. If we can't name what's wrong, right? I said capitalism and speciesism, Gene. We could add patriarchy. How are we going to get from point A to point B, which is the fun part, without the stuff part, right? So maybe implicit in what you're saying is the need for radical change. I mean, I think
absolutely, yeah. We had a bit of blowback on fun. We said providing it doesn't hurt anybody or anything, right? Because
right.
You pull the wings off of insects for fun, and that's not what we're talking about. But it has a way of entering people's mind quicker than they can set up social barriers. And the idea is to just sort of saturate the population with a basic understanding of the direction, and then all the different organizations that are saying we need to make this sort of change can recognize their commonality.
Sounds great. And maybe someone can send me a link to the work you're doing. And similarly, anyone who wants to contact me. I'd love to hear what folks are working on. You can just write me at my university, which is js@wpi.edu, or you can look up my name on the internet. I have a website. You can contact me through the website. Thank you, Mike.
Welcome. Thank you.
If anybody wants to contact John and isn't able immediately to do so, you can contact Art Hunter, Raymond Lurie, or me, and we'll be able to get you his email. And I see Andrew is now with us, and he's going to be able to thank you.
Great. Hi, my name is Andrew Welch. I'm the chair of the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome. Thank you to John Sanbonmatsu for your very powerful DNA-based paradigm, twisting capitalism and speciesism together. Your focus on animals from their welfare to their consumption was unexpected and really powerful. I think a lot of us talk about the loss of biodiversity and species extinction, but we assume that some of those numbers have to include little microbes that we don't care about. And of course, they are extremely important. But when you start seeing the animals that look a lot more like us and the actual numbers involved, that was really powerful. I want to say this kind of presentation is the result of a lot of great people working together to capture the knowledge on the leading edge and sharing it out to Canada and the world. That's what our organization is all about. I hope if you enjoyed this video presentation, you might consider supporting our efforts to continue this kind of programming by joining CACOR yourself, or anyone watching this on the Leading Edge YouTube channel. You can join us as a member or an associate, and you'll not only be invited every week to join these live sessions and participate in the Q&A and discussion to follow, but you'll also be providing the donation needed to make this kind of knowledge dissemination happen. All of the membership fees are 100% tax deductible. The website is there on the screen, because we're a registered Canadian educational charity. Please share this presentation, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much.